Well, I have to admit to being a little bit addicted to the Facebook. I see some hands went up there too. And those of you who are probably also addicted, you know that you can confirm my addiction. I'm always posting things up on the Facebook. Now, I am not compelled by Farmville, although Marge... Oh, yeah, come on. Oh, she quit. Okay, she quit. She can quit anytime. It's not the Farmville that compels me, but actually I am really interested in the connectivity of Facebook, the social network aspect of Facebook, the being able to share things like run or like I just cleaned the toilets, you know, with friends and have in common. This last week I shared the sermon on with Facebook, and it was neat to get feedback about the sermon that way. And so I really enjoy the community that it forms. But do you know something? Mark Zuckerberg didn't come up with this idea of the social network. And he didn't steal it from the Winklevoss brothers either. No, that's not it. In fact, the social network has been around even since the time of Jesus. That is, in fact, this social network angle, this desire to try to connect people in meaningful ways that transforms the world. This desire to try to connect people has been around since the time of Jesus, hasn't it? And this whole business about likes, buttons, and the like, that's been around since the time of Jesus. Well, we encounter this button of like in our scriptures this day. And if you'd like to follow along, I noted that the fill-in-the-blanks are in the communicator on the back page. And in it, we encounter this parable that Jesus offers to help us think about those of us who are caught up in ourselves. Those of us who are so focused on our own selves that we probably wouldn't want to be on the Facebook. We're not really interested in connecting with the other. You know, the church is one of those places that is very social. And quite frankly, when I encounter a person who's very private and likes to be on their own, maybe one of those rugged individuals, I think, boy, the church is going to be a hard sell for you. Because you really have to be dependent on your sisters and your brothers in the church, right? And so trying to invite someone who is so radically private, so radically individualistic into the life of the church, it's kind of tough. And so in this parable, Jesus is trying to reach out to those who might identify with someone who is so radically individualistic, radically private, that they don't really want to share their likes, let alone their dislikes. And so here we find this parable, and in it we encounter this Pharisee. And the Pharisee comes and he is making this prayer. And he's offering this prayer and he says, Lord, I'm glad I'm not like all of these other people. Now what's interesting as we encounter this text and the way we have come to read it in the various translations, and in the translation that we read today, it's almost as if the Pharisee is making this prayer not with the group of people, but he sort of goes off by himself. He goes off by himself. He can still see everybody else, but he is separate from all the other people, all the ragamuffins that are gathered at the sanctuary. He goes off by himself and makes this prayer observing, quietly observing them. This interpretation of the text, if you will, this translation of the text, that way, where the Pharisee goes off by himself, sort of fits with our understanding of Pharisees as those people who don't want to be polluted with the common folk, who want to separate themselves from the common folk. They used to do that with their fancy robes. You know, I didn't wear my fancy robe today. They want to separate themselves from the common folk, even in his prayer. But as we encounter, and actually as we try to read directly from the Greek, and I've had Greek scholars sort of help me get my head around this. Perhaps this whole bit about him separating himself from the masses doesn't quite fit with the way the Greek flows. And in fact, it's not really an issue about him separating himself from the masses, but maybe what's more at stake as we read the Greek is that he was praying silently to himself. And so let's have that fill in the blank there. The Pharisee prayed to himself. And the Greek scholars who chatted me up about this were saying, it's almost the way it's read in the Greek, it's almost as if he wasn't even praying to God, but he was sort of praying to himself. Boy, talk about self-absorbed. Praying to himself. And the business about, I'm so glad I'm not like all the other people. God, I'm so glad I'm not like all the other people. It wasn't even addressing God in a way. It was almost a second afterthought. But he's really saying, I'm so glad I'm not like all these other common folk. Praying to himself. It's almost as if he was taking a kind of self-indulgence. Enjoying the fact that he wasn't like all the other people. Enjoying the fact that he could get lost even in the rules of religion. Those rules of religion, did you hear them? I fast all the time. Every week I fast. Did you hear them? What was the other thing? Tithing. The tithing. Let's have that fill in the blank there. I give a tenth of all my income. Now, some people were asking me recently, even not this week, and we were talking about tithing, and they're trying to get their heads around, well, what is a tithe? Well, how do I participate in this religious practice, this spiritual practice that is a tithe? And, is it really a tenth? And here we have a little bit of scripture that supports that logic of a tenth of all your income. And so I don't want to discourage you from trying to pick up that practice of a tenth of all your income. But I don't want you to also pick it up only as a means to try to get lost in self-indulgence and sort of self-worship of yourselves. I don't want you to get lost in that thing. But it's true that these practices, when done right, and maybe even done in community, carefully in community, can be very spiritually transforming and can be good. But at least for this Pharisee, he was trying to separate himself. If not physically from the rest of the people, but at least in his mind from the rest of the people, even in these practices of the tithing, of the fasting. He was separating himself and becoming a bit self-absorbed. He was separating himself and taking a little bit of self-indulgence, if you will. And Jesus is offering us this parable as a means to those of us who would take our pride too seriously. As a means for those of us who would take our privacy too seriously. As a means of those of us who would even maybe take ourselves too seriously. And he invites us to, take a look at the straw man, the Pharisee, that he sets up. And we, like all of these parables that we've encountered, and try to look at them and maybe even flip-flop them up on their heads a bit, and remember that reversal of fortune theology. Did you hear it at the end of this passage? Did anybody remember what it said at the end of this passage, that reversal of fortune? Yeah. Be careful, those of you who have pride, or you're going to be humbled. And those of you who are humble, you will be exalted. See that? Hear that reversal of fortune? And so here we have the straw man of the Pharisee who is he's self-absorbed. He's taking some self-indulgence. And he's focused on himself and all the wrong things. He seems to be getting it completely wrong. Let's have that last one blank. All who humble themselves will be exalted. The Pharisee, even though he's taking up the spiritual disciplines, because he was separating himself from the others among him, because he was seeing himself as unlike all those others, he was missing the mark terribly. What he needed to do was start to see himself just like all the others. What he needed to do as he was looking at all the others gathered in this place, especially that tax collector, he needed to be pressing the like button for each and every one of those people. He needed to be seeing himself in each and every one of those people so that all those spiritual disciplines that he was taking up would take up meaning more than just a sales pitch, like they had on Facebook, but more like Jesus, the teacher of the way of the original social network, more like for transformation of heart and mind and soul. Moses was saying, you take up all of these fancy practices of religion like fasting and like tithing so that you might be transformed and the world might be transformed. You take up all of these rules of the faith so that you can keep the 10 rules. So that you can keep the 2 most important rules that Jesus was trying to remind us of. What were they? The 2 most important rules.
Love God and love your neighbor.
Love your God and love your neighbor. And I wore this shirt on purpose. Love God. Love people. All the law and the prophets can be summed up in this, said Jesus. Love God. Love people. And the Pharisee, because he was saying, I'm so much unlike all those others, and because he was even maybe praying to himself and taking that self-indulgence, he was failing to do even the first one. He definitely got the second one wrong, but maybe he was even failing at the first one. He was loving himself more than even God. And loving yourself, sisters and brothers, that's idolatry. When you replace yourself over God, you have failed in the first commandment, which is love God. I'm a good and jealous God. And I don't want you to love anybody else but me first. Love God first. Well, remember the reversal of fortune theology. The Pharisee and set him up as a strong man, and we get it. Okay, we're not so self-indulgent. But how often are we like that publican, the tax collector, who beats himself at the altar? Lord, I'm a sinner. Forgive me. And Jesus says, he's more blessed than the person who would be singing the gospel of count your blessings, name them one by one. I'm not saying that's a bad song. It's a good song. And you should count your blessings, but not to the way that you're separating yourself from those who are less fortunate, but so that you're connecting with those who are less fortunate. But the publican is actually beating himself up, and if he doesn't receive the forgiveness of sins at that moment that he's beating himself up, when he goes down, he's not blessed at all, is he? How often do we just continuously beat ourselves up? And sisters and brothers, that is a form of self-indulgence too. So approach even this day, approach the altar with humility. But don't forget to receive God's blessings of forgiveness. Your challenge this week, if you choose to accept it, spend time with those you would consider others. Be brave enough to click the like button as you're with them. Here's a second one. You might be scratching your head when you saw it. Clean a toilet. This week, Zipporah really wanted to help with the cleaning. And she was going around with the Clorox bleach wipes and wiping everything, including my fine leather chair. Now, if you want to clean the throne for her, there's the proper throne room. Go clean that room. No! Yuck! That's your job, Dad. She's right. It is your job. It is my job. And there's nothing like that makes you humble but to go into that throne room and clean the porcelain throne. There's no more humble experience than that. So I invite you to take up that practice along with me this week. Your challenge this week is to choose to accept it. Stop beating yourself up. If you're one of those people and you continue to beat yourself up over that thing, receive the forgiveness of sins that Jesus offers you. Come here to the altar, lay it there, and leave it there. Stop beating yourself up and go home in that forgiveness. Amen.